Oxoacid nomenclature. What is an oxoacid? An oxoacid is an acid that contains hydrogen, oxygen, and another element, at least one hydrogen atom to bond with an oxygen atom. There are several rules that come into play when naming these types of acids. Important to note that their name stems from their polyatomic anion and its ending. Sometimes polyatomic anion subscripts play a role in oxoacid nomenclature. Rules for naming oxoacids. Rule number 1. Based on the polyatomic anion, if the anion ends in -ate, the ending must be changed to -ic acid. Rule number 2. Based on the polyatomic anion, if the anion ends in -ite, the ending must be changed to -ous acid. Rule number 3. When an element forms more than two oxoanions, pair is added in front of the ion with the most oxygen atoms, and hypo is added in front of the ion with the least oxygen atoms. All oxoanions formed in between the ions with the most and least oxygen atoms present follow rules number 1 and 2. It is important to note that a common mistake made is people try to include the hydrogen in the nomenclature. In these cases, the hydrogen is just an indicator that it is an acid. Important polyatomic anions to remember: ammonium, NH4+, carbonate, CO3-2, cyanide, Cn-, acetate, CH3CO2, nitrate, NO3-, phosphate, PO4-3, sulfate, SO4-2, and hydroxide, OH-. Here's an example for rule number 1 of the oxoacid nomenclature. So our first example is HNO3. First, we must be able to identify the polyatomic ion. In this specific formula, the polyatomic anion is NO3. Based on the list that was shown previously of the important polyatomic anions to remember, you can give this anion the name of nitrate. Now that the polyatomic anion has been identified, you must apply the oxoacid nomenclature rule number 1. This rule states that based on the polyatomic anion, if the anion ends with -ate, change the ending to -ic acid. That being said, HNO3 can be given the name of nitric acid. An example for rule number 2. Here we have H2SO3. This oxoacid needs to have the oxygen subscript taken into account during the nomenclature process. First, identify the polyatomic anion. In this formula, the polyatomic anion, according to our list, would be SO4. However, you must notice that the O subscript in our oxoacid is 3 and not 4. This means our polyatomic anion is not sulfate, but it is sulfite. Now that the polyatomic anion has been properly identified, apply oxoacid nomenclature rule number 2. This rule states that based on the polyatomic anion, if the anion ends with -ite, change the ending to -ous acid. That being said, the proper oxoacid name for H2SO3 is sulfurous acid. Example for rule number 3. Oxoacids containing chlorine. This is because they form more than one oxoanion. Oxoacids containing chlorine actually create 4 oxoanions, and their formulas are HClO4, HClO3, HClO2, and HClO. First, you must identify the polyatomic anion, and the polyatomic anion in all 4 formulas is ClO. This would be chlorite. However, the O subscript in each formula could indicate the anion be named chlorite or chlorate. For HClO4, the O subscript indicates that the anion will be named chlorate. It also has the most oxygen atoms present, so according to the oxoacid rule, this means that pair will be added in front. Since the polyatomic anion ends in 8, the ending will change to ic acid. That being said, the oxoacid name for HClO4 is perchloric acid. HClO3, the polyatomic anion based on the subscript, is chlorate. Since it does not have the most or the least oxygen atoms present, it only follows the nomenclature rules for 1 and 2. That being said, based on the anion, if the anion ends with 8, the ending will change to ic acid. That being said, the oxoacid name for HClO3 is chloric acid. HClO2 is very similar to HClO3. The polyatomic anion based on the subscript is chlorite. Since it does not have the most or the least oxygen atoms present, it only follows the nomenclature rules of 1 and 2. Based on the anion, if the anion ends with ite, the ending will change to OS acid. That being said, the oxoacid name for HClO2 is chlorous acid. Lastly, we have HClO. The O subscript indicates the anion will be named chlorite. It has the least oxygen atoms present, and according to the oxoacid rule, this means that hypo will be added in front. Since the polyatomic anion ends in ite, the ending will change to OS acid. That being said, the oxoacid name for HClO is hypochlorous acid.